My daughter made a shocking discovery. She found cameras hidden inside her school's locker room. Even more alarming, the principal is completely refusing to take them down. This blatant disregard for student privacy is outrageous and deeply concerning for our family and everyone involved. This story, it starts with a moment that shattered our family's sense of safety, a moment that makes a parent's blood run absolutely cold. Imagine your 14-year-old daughter coming home, shaking, hyperventilating, and telling you, "Mom, there are cameras in our locker room." She was utterly violated, throwing her phone at me before sprinting upstairs, where I could hear the shower running for an hour, scrubbing her skin until it bled to get the feeling of being watched off. Before I even had a chance to fully process the horror, I was already on the phone calling every parent I knew. That same evening, 7 of us, including a fierce lawyer mom who specialized in child advocacy, stormed into the principal's office after hours. "Why are there cameras where our children change?" I yelled, my voice cracking with pure rage. But Mrs. Lynch, the principal, was unervingly calm, almost like she'd rehearsed this, an explanation already forming on her lips. Everyone was threatening lawsuits, calling the police, until she finally spoke. According to her, these cameras were for our children's safety. "Our safety?" someone scoffed. "Yes," Mrs. Lynch continued, as if speaking to unruly toddlers. "Last year we had an act of property destruction in the changing rooms. We all remembered that. Someone had deliberately left the taps running, flooding the entire school. Every single kid had been interrogated one-on-one by Mrs. Lynch and her own brother, a police officer. So now the cameras," she explained, "were there to ensure that if it happened again, the perpetrator would be caught, and our innocent kids wouldn't risk being suspected." It sounded plausible in a cold corporate way. But Sandra, the lawyer mom, wasn't buying it. She filed an emergency injunction the moment she got to her car. That night, her voice was tight with frustration when she called me. "The judge won't hear it until Monday, for days after tryouts," she said, defeated. "And even then, these cases usually favor the institution when there's documented property damage." By morning, 17 girls had dropped out of tryouts, and my daughter hadn't touched food since yesterday. When I drove her to school, she broke completely, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Everyone knows there's cameras, Mom," she choked out. "The boys keep making jokes about trying out just to see the footage." My heart shattered for her. That afternoon, the secretary called me, her voice frantic. Turns out my daughter had marched into Lynch's office during lunch, with 20 other girls right behind her. When I arrived, I could hear my daughter's voice through the door, stronger, more defiant than I'd heard it in days. "We're not leaving until you remove the cameras," she declared. Lynch's manufactured calm finally cracked, she snapped. "I cannot have students making demands in my office." And that's when my daughter said something that made me so incredibly proud. "Then none of us try out tomorrow, and you can explain to the school board why the swim program suddenly died." Lynch immediately called her cop brother, who arrived within 10 minutes. But instead of removing the girls, as his sister clearly expected, he started taking formal statements about why they felt unsafe. That's when one girl, brave and shaking, mentioned seeing Mr. Gary, the vice principal, entering Lynch's office after hours multiple times that week. The officer's entire expression shifted. He turned to his sister, his voice sharp. "Gary has keys to your office?" Mrs. Lynch went pale. "Well, yes, for emergencies, but..." Her brother cut her off. "And the camera footage is accessed exclusively through your computer?" The room went absolutely silent as the horrifying implication hit everyone at once. Lynch's face drained of all color as her brother requested the footage logs immediately. The metadata showed system access at 11 different times when Lynch was documented as being off campus, including 3 instances after midnight. She tried to explain it away as system glitches or automatic updates, but her brother wasn't buying any of it. He started making calls over his radio. Gary was pulled in for questioning within the hour. I was sitting with my daughter in the parking lot, trying to convince her to eat something, when we saw Gary being escorted out in handcuffs, his face covered with his jacket. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was over. But my daughter wasn't celebrating. Instead, she was scrolling through the school's website on her phone. "Mom," she said suddenly, "the swim team page shows last year's team photo. Look at the locker room behind them." I looked. Same walls, same benches, same everything. Except something was different. There were small black domes in the corners of the ceiling that looked exactly like the cameras Lynch had shown us. Lynch had said the cameras were installed after the flooding in March. But the timestamp on the team photo? It was from January. My daughter looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. Mom, if the cameras were already there before the flooding, then why did Lynch lie about when they were installed? My eyes bugged open. Together, we got out of the car and started marching towards the school. The heavy glass doors slammed against the wall as we pushed through them. My daughter's phone screen stayed bright in her hand, showing that January photo with those damning black camera domes. A janitor mopping near the trophy cases looked up for half a second, then went back to his bucket. Our footsteps echoed down the empty hallway as we half ran toward the main office. Through the frosted glass, I could see Lynch still at her desk, her brother standing over her shoulder. I didn't knock. The door hit the wall hard enough to rattle the framed diplomas when I shoved it open. Lynch's head snapped up, and her brother turned toward us, his hand moving toward his hip before catching himself. I crossed the room in 3 steps and slammed my daughter's phone down on the desk hard enough that coffee splashed out of Lynch's mug. The January date showed clear as day under the team photo with those cameras visible in the background. Lynch started talking fast about how timestamps could be wrong, how metadata could get corrupted from uploads and transfers. Her voice cracked on the word corrupted, and I watched her brother's eyes narrow as he looked between the phone and his sister's face. He picked up the phone, zoomed in on the image, then set it down carefully. When exactly did you submit the purchase order for these cameras? His voice had gone flat and professional. Lynch's fingers fumbled with her mouse as she clicked through folders on her computer screen. She claimed she didn't have those records readily available right now, but could probably find them later. Her brother leaned over her shoulder and told her to pull them up immediately. The room went completely silent except for the clicking of her mouse and the hum of the computer fan. She typed something, then deleted it, then typed again, moving through screens way too slow for someone who knew where files were supposed to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. The emergency injunction hearing was confirmed for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. She'd filed 3 additional motions, but warned that judges almost never interfere with school operations without immediate danger to students. The tryouts were still scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, and legally they couldn't stop them. Lynch kept clicking through folders, pretending to search, while her brother watched every move she made on the screen. My daughter stood beside me, recording everything on her phone without saying a word. We drove home in silence after Lynch's brother told us he'd be in touch about the evidence. I made mac and cheese from a box because it was the only thing my daughter would sometimes eat when she was stressed. She pushed it around her plate, taking tiny bites while I watched to make sure she actually swallowed something. Neither of us wanted to be alone that night, so I dragged her mattress onto my bedroom floor. We lay there in the dark, listening to each other breathe but not really sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those cameras in the January photo that Lynch swore weren't installed until March. My daughter's phone lit up the ceiling at 2 a.m. and again at 3 a.m. as she scrolled through something, but I didn't ask what. Friday morning, her phone started going crazy before we even got out of bed. Screenshot after screenshot filled her messages from classmates, showing group chats where boys were making jokes about the locker room footage. One said he'd pay $50 for a copy, and another responded with laughing emojis, saying he'd go higher for certain girls. My daughter sat at the kitchen table with tears running down her face as she methodically saved every screenshot into a folder labeled evidence. She numbered them and added timestamps, noting who sent what in a spreadsheet she created on her laptop. The cold, analytical way she handled it broke my heart even more. The school parking lot looked like a crime scene when we pulled up. News vans lined the front entrance, and parents stood in clusters, pointing and whispering. Lynch's brother was back with 2 other officers, taking statements from a group of girls near the flagpole. I watched through Lynch's office window as 2 officers walked someone out the back door with a jacket over their head. The person stumbled on the steps, and the jacket slipped, showing Gary's face for just a second before they pushed him into an unmarked car. I found Lynch's brother and handed him my daughter's phone with the January photo pulled up. He immediately called someone on his radio about establishing chain of custody for digital evidence. He took photos of the phone screen with his own camera, then had my daughter email him the original file. He kept muttering about timeline inconsistencies, while making notes about who had building access during installation periods. That evening, I called the district superintendent's office and got transferred 3 times before reaching someone who would listen. I demanded immediate Title IX involvement and a full independent audit of all security systems in the district. The secretary's voice sounded tired as she said she'd add my message to the list, but I could hear phones ringing nonstop in the background. Saturday morning, a young guy in khakis and a district polo showed up at the school. Alan Myers from IT security looked like he just graduated college, but he knew his stuff. He explained how he could track every login and timestamp in the system and recover deleted files if the data hadn't been completely wiped. He had 3 laptops and a box of cables that he started connecting to Lynch's computer while taking photos of every step. My phone buzzed with an email from Coach Wyatt while Alan worked. The subject line said, "Please don't give up on our team." I opened it to find 3 paragraphs begging parents and swimmers not to abandon the program he'd built over 15 years. He swore he had no knowledge about the cameras and offered to hold practice at the community pool if the district would let him. I forwarded it to the parent group chat and watched 20 replies pop up in under a minute. Some parents thought he was covering his ass, while others believed him since he'd always been good to the kids. Alan glanced at the screen and muttered something about checking Wyatt's email access logs too. That afternoon, my daughter sat at the kitchen table with 5 other girls from the team. All of them hunched over laptops and phones. They created an online petition demanding camera removal, and within 2 hours, it had 300 signatures. I watched her copy and paste the link into every social media platform she had access to. Her hands were steady, but I could see the dark circles under her eyes getting worse. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since this started and barely touched the sandwich I'd made her. Sandra came over that evening with a stack of paperwork and her laptop. We sat at my dining room table, filling out the formal Title IX complaint, requesting immediate interim measures, including camera removal and alternative changing arrangements. She helped me word everything properly, explaining what each section meant. We also submitted a FOIA request for all contracts, emails, and documentation related to the camera installation. Sandra said the district had to respond within 20 business days, but we might get some information sooner if they were smart about damage control. Sunday morning my phone rang at 7:30 a.m., and the caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. Georgia King from the local paper introduced herself and asked if I'd be willing to do an interview. I hesitated because the last thing my daughter needed was more attention, but I also knew media pressure might be the only thing that forced the district to act quickly. I told her I'd think about it and call her back. The district sent out a mass email at noon, claiming the cameras were installed in accordance with safety protocols after the vandalism incident. They cited student safety and property protection as their primary concerns. The parent group chat exploded immediately with arguments between those who thought surveillance was justified for property protection and those demanding privacy. One dad wrote that his daughter hadn't changed at the school in 2 years because she was paranoid about being watched. Another mom said, "Maybe if kids weren't so destructive, we wouldn't need cameras." The argument got so heated that Sandra had to step in and remind everyone we needed to stay united. Monday morning brought an email from Amy Gordon at the Title IX office, confirming she'd received our complaint. She outlined the investigation timeline, which could take up to 60 days, but authorized interim measures, including the option for students to change in alternate locations with adult supervision. She also said she'd be interviewing students and staff over the next 2 weeks. Alan called me that afternoon with news that made my stomach turn. The system showed multiple data retention policy violations, with footage being stored way longer than the stated 48-hour period. Some files dated back 3 months, which meant hundreds of hours of girls changing had been saved somewhere. He requested server imaging and all vendor documentation about installation dates and access protocols. He said he'd need a few more days to trace where the files were being backed up. Sandra warned me that evening that the school might try to retaliate against my daughter, or make her uncomfortable enough to transfer. She'd seen it happen in other cases where the whistleblower became the target. We set up a documentation protocol where every interaction, comment, and incident would get recorded with timestamps and witnesses. I bought my daughter a small notebook to carry, and told her to write down everything that happened at the school. Tuesday night, my daughter showed me her phone with tears streaming down her face. She'd received nasty direct messages on social media, calling her a snitch and worse. One message said she was ruining the swim program for everyone, and another said she should transfer schools if she didn't like the cameras. We screenshotted everything and saved it to a folder on my computer. I called the school counselor's emergency line and scheduled an appointment for Monday, even though my daughter insisted she was fine. Coach Wyatt posted on the team's social media page Wednesday morning, saying he supported the students' right to feel safe and was exploring all options to save the season. The comments section turned into a battleground within minutes. Some parents called for his resignation, saying he should have known about the cameras. Others defended him, pointing out he didn't have keys to Lynch's office or access to the footage. A few swimmers posted that they wanted to keep training, but didn't feel safe at the school anymore. The arguing continued for hours, with people taking screenshots and sharing them in private group chats. By Thursday morning, the whole situation had spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined when my daughter first told me about those cameras. Georgia King's article dropped online Friday morning, and my phone started buzzing nonstop with notifications from parents sharing it everywhere. She'd kept all the kids' names out but laid out the timeline perfectly, showing how Lynch lied about when the cameras went in. By lunch, the article had over 10,000 shares, and the comment section was going crazy with parents from other schools saying they had cameras too. The district's PR person sent out a damage control email an hour later, announcing an emergency school board meeting in 2 weeks about security protocols and student privacy concerns. Sandra immediately started a group text with 20 parents, planning who would speak and what points each person would cover. We divided up topics like legal issues, emotional trauma, privacy violations, and demands for policy changes, knowing we'd each only get 3 minutes at the podium. That same afternoon, Lynch's union attorney released a statement saying she was scapegoated for following district protocols that were approved years ago. The statement claimed Lynch was just doing her job, and that the real issue was with district-wide policies, not individual administrators. Parents in our group chat went nuts when they read it, especially the part where the district announced Lynch would stay in her position during the investigation. Sandra's phone rang while we were all still typing angry responses, and she put it on speaker so we could hear. Mark Cohen from the DA's office was on the line, explaining that he was taking over the criminal case because Lynch's brother had a conflict of interest. He asked Sandra to gather all our documentation and said he'd handled 3 similar surveillance cases in schools over the past 5 years. He sounded sharp and asked specific questions about the timeline, the vendor contracts, and who had access to the footage. Meanwhile, Alan was digging through district records and found something that made my stomach drop. He'd located vendor contracts showing talks about camera installation started in November, for whole months before the flooding happened. The email headers showed someone was pushing hard for quick installation, but the actual email bodies were mysteriously missing from the files. He forwarded everything to Mark Cohen and started working on recovering the deleted content from backup servers. Monday morning, our FOIA request finally came back, but half the pages were blacked out with redaction markers. The parts we could read showed Lynch explicitly pushing for cameras in December, citing vague liability concerns with no specifics. Sandra spent hours going through the documents and said the redaction patterns were suspicious, like someone was hiding specific names and dates. She filed an appeal for the full unredacted documents but warned us it could take weeks to get a response. A bunch of swim parents started meeting at the coffee shop to figure out if we could hold tryouts at the community pool instead. The pool manager was sympathetic, but said their insurance company needed to review everything first. Since it wasn't a school event, we'd need background checks for parent volunteers, liability waivers from every family, and the pool board's lawyers had to approve everything. Things started getting messy in our parent group when 3 families decided to hire their own lawyers to pursue individual settlements. Sandra warned them this would weaken our collective bargaining position, but they didn't care. They just wanted money for therapy and to move on. The group chat turned into arguments about whether we should focus on policy changes or financial compensation. My daughter hadn't eaten a real meal in over a week and kept waking up screaming about cameras in her bedroom. I made an appointment with a therapist even though she insisted she was fine and just wanted to focus on fighting back. The therapist said she was showing signs of hypervigilance and recommended twice-weekly sessions to process the trauma. Georgia called me Tuesday night with a tip from someone who wouldn't give their name. They said something similar happened at another district school 3 years ago, but it got settled quietly with NDAs. She started digging into old school board minutes and found references to a sealed settlement involving surveillance equipment. The source said at least 5 families got payouts but couldn't talk about what happened because of the legal agreements. Georgia was trying to find someone willing to break their NDA to expose the pattern. The next few days blurred together with constant emails, phone calls, and meetings as we tried to keep pressure on the district. Alan kept finding more evidence of early camera planning, while Sandra dealt with the families going rogue with separate lawsuits. My daughter started therapy but spent most nights researching privacy laws and helping other kids document their experiences. The school board meeting was coming up fast, and we knew it was our best shot at forcing real changes. Parents practiced their speeches in my living room, timing each other with a stopwatch to make sure we stayed under 3 minutes. We made poster boards with timeline evidence and printed copies of Georgia's article to hand out to board members. The district kept sending out vague statements about reviewing policies and taking student concerns seriously, but wouldn't commit to removing cameras from any other schools. Lynch stayed silent except through her attorney, who kept insisting she was just following orders from higher up. Gary's criminal case was moving forward, but Mark Cohen warned us these things take months, and we shouldn't expect quick justice. The community pool board finally agreed to let us use their facility for unofficial tryouts, but with so many restrictions, it barely seemed worth it. Parents would have to pay for extra insurance, hire certified lifeguards, and sign papers saying the school district had no liability. Coach Wyatt wanted to help, but the district threatened to fire him if he participated in any non-school swim activities with current students. He called me that night anyway, saying he'd rent the community pool himself and supervise tryouts off the books if we could get enough girls interested. I started texting other parents, but within an hour, the district's HR department sent him an official warning letter threatening contract violations if he went through with it. He texted me a photo of the letter with a shaking hands emoji, then said he was thinking about getting his own lawyer to fight back. The next morning, a school board member I knew from book club pulled me aside at the grocery store. She looked around nervously before whispering that HR cared more about avoiding lawsuits than protecting kids, and we should document everything because they try to minimize this at the public meeting. I went straight home and started organizing every email, text, and photo into folders while my daughter helped by creating spreadsheets of dates and times. Mark Cohen called that afternoon asking if we could meet at Sandra's office to discuss the criminal case he was building. We sat around her conference table as he explained the charges could range from unlawful surveillance to criminal negligence, but proving intent would be hard. He showed us similar cases that ended in plea deals where nobody went to jail and asked us to keep our expectations realistic. Alan called during the meeting with news that made everyone go quiet. He'd found someone was accessing the camera system from home addresses late at night, not just from the school computers like we thought. The access logs showed specific patterns that focused on certain cameras at certain times. And when he mapped it out, the viewing times matched when girls would be changing for practice. My hands started shaking as I realized what this meant, that someone was deliberately watching our daughters from their own home. Lynch's lawyer released a statement the next day claiming Gary acted alone and had stolen her login information without her knowledge. Nobody bought it, especially when her own brother called Sandra to say Lynch never reported any unauthorized access to her accounts like she would have if someone really stole them. He sounded disgusted with his sister and said he'd testify about what he knew if needed. Tuesday morning we all showed up for Gary's arraignment, where the judge set bail at $50,000. His family posted it within 2 hours, and he walked out wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. The rumors at the school got wilder by the hour, with kids saying everything from hidden cameras in the bathrooms to teachers selling footage online. That evening's PTA meeting was packed with over 200 parents crammed into the cafeteria. My daughter asked to speak, and when her turn came, she stood at the microphone for 3 full minutes, describing how violated and unsafe she felt. The room stayed completely silent when she finished, and I saw several moms wiping their eyes. She sat down next to me and grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. Amy Gordon stood up next to announce new interim measures requiring immediate deactivation of all cameras in changing areas. She said students could request a trusted adult to escort them to alternative changing spaces until trust was rebuilt. It was something, but the damage was already done, and everyone knew it. Wednesday morning, the maintenance crew started removing the black domes from the locker room ceilings. The head of maintenance claimed they were just fake deterrent covers that were never actually connected to anything. Parents started yelling that this was another lie and demanded proof they weren't recording. Someone's dad, who worked in electronics, offered to examine one of the removed units himself. Alan showed up with thermal imaging equipment and started scanning where the cameras had been mounted. His equipment showed clear heat signatures, indicating active electrical connections had been running to each mounting point. He pulled up power consumption logs from the building's electrical system that showed consistent draw patterns matching active surveillance equipment. He typed up his findings right there in the locker room, creating a technical report that proved beyond doubt the cameras were real and recording. The maintenance chief went pale reading it and mumbled something about just following orders before walking away. Alan emailed his report to Mark Cohen, Sandra, and Georgia. Within minutes, parents started taking photos of everything: the removed cameras, the mounting points, Alan's thermal images on his laptop screen. My daughter stood next to me, recording video on her phone of Alan explaining his findings to a group of parents. The principal's office stayed dark and locked, with nobody answering when parents knocked, demanding answers about who knew the cameras were real. Thursday morning, I got an email from the administrators' union saying Lynch was subjected to harassment, and they were filing a formal grievance. They demanded the district provide her with a lawyer and keep paying her while she was on leave. The email went to all parents, and within minutes my phone was blowing up with angry texts. Sandra called me, saying this was typical union tactics to protect bad administrators, and we shouldn't let it distract us. That evening's community forum at the high school gym was packed with over 300 people. Parents were already yelling at each other before the meeting even started. One dad stood up saying the school had every right to protect property after the flooding. Another mom screamed back that our daughter's privacy mattered more than some water damage. My daughter sat next to me with a notebook, writing down everything people said. She stayed calm even when two fathers almost got into a fist fight near the stage. The security guard had to step between them while people recorded everything on their phones. Georgia texted me during the chaos, saying she'd gotten something important through a source at the vendor company. She sent me photos of invoices showing the cameras were ordered in November, but someone had changed the dates. The paperwork showed they were backdated to make it look like they were bought after the March flooding. She said she was already sharing everything with Mark Cohen for his investigation. Sandra met with us after the forum to discuss the class action lawsuit she was preparing. She spread out papers on my kitchen table, showing different legal strategies we could use. The hardest part was figuring out how to protect the girls' identities while still building a strong case. We spent 3 hours going through options, debating whether using their real names would help or hurt them. Sandra kept saying we needed to balance getting justice with protecting the victims from more trauma. My daughter listened from the stairs even though I told her to go to bed. The next morning at school pickup, I noticed my daughter's best friend, Alice, walking past without even looking at her. My daughter ran after her, but Alice kept walking, saying her parents told her to stay away. I watched my daughter's face crumble as Alice got into her mom's car, and they drove off. She held it together until we got home. Then I heard her crying in her room for an hour. I sat outside her door, not knowing what to say to make it better. That afternoon, kids started texting about an image going around Snapchat that supposedly showed a still from the locker room cameras. Nobody could prove if it was real, but girls were panicking, thinking their bodies might be online. The school sent out cease and desist letters to anyone sharing the image. The damage was already done, though, with girls too scared to use any school bathrooms or change for gym class. Parents started keeping their daughters home, saying they wouldn't send them back until this was resolved. The district announced the next board meeting would have an executive session closed to the public. They said sensitive personnel matters would be discussed that couldn't be shared openly. We immediately started organizing speakers for the public comment period since we'd only get 3 minutes each. Sandra helped us write statements that would have maximum impact in minimal time. We practiced reading them to each other, timing everything with a stopwatch. Mark Cohen called with good news, saying he'd gotten a judge to sign a limited search warrant. He could now examine Lynch's work computer and the school's servers for evidence. He warned us that digital forensics take weeks or months, and we shouldn't expect quick answers. He said his tech team would start pulling data immediately, but analyzing it all would take time. He sounded confident, though, saying the evidence was mounting and charges were looking more likely. Friday morning, the district sent out another email saying swim tryouts were postponed indefinitely. They also announced Coach Wyatt's supplemental coaching pay was suspended pending the investigation. He called me that afternoon sounding defeated, saying he was thinking about resigning completely. He said he'd worked 15 years building the program and couldn't stand watching it fall apart. He didn't want to abandon the kids who trained so hard, but didn't know if he could keep going. I told him we supported him and knew this wasn't his fault, but he still sounded broken. Over the weekend I realized I was falling apart too, snapping at everyone and barely sleeping. I yelled at the grocery store clerk for no reason and hung up on my sister when she called. My daughter noticed and did something that surprised me completely. She called the school counselor and organized a parent support group for all of us dealing with this. She made flyers and posted them online, setting up the first meeting for Monday evening. Watching my 14-year-old take charge like that made me proud, but also worried. She was being so strong for everyone else, but I knew she was still hurting inside. The role reversal felt wrong with her taking care of me when I should be protecting her. Sunday night, she made me dinner and asked if I was okay, holding my hand across the table. I wanted to tell her to just be a kid, but I could see she needed to feel useful. She'd already lost so much through this, and taking action seemed to be how she was coping. Monday morning, Sandra called me while I was making breakfast with news that made me drop my coffee mug. The vendor company that installed the cameras had sent an email to the district's legal team about protecting themselves from lawsuits. They'd accidentally copied Sandra on it, and the email talked about pressure from unnamed administrators to get cameras installed before January. Sandra said, "This was the smoking gun we needed to prove Lynch lied about the timeline." I forwarded it to everyone in our parent group while my daughter ate her cereal and checked her phone. Alan had been working all weekend on his technical report and called me that afternoon saying he was ready. He'd found proof the cameras were fully working in January with power logs and network traffic data. He was meeting with the district lawyers at 3 p.m. to show them everything. I picked up my daughter from the school, and we sat in the parking lot waiting to hear how it went. Alan texted me at 4:30 p.m. saying the lawyers looked sick when they saw his report. They couldn't deny the evidence anymore and knew Lynch's story was completely blown. Georgia called me that evening with more bad news that turned out to be good for our case. She'd been digging into other schools in our district and found 2 more with cameras in changing areas. Parents from those schools started calling me, asking how to join our fight. By Tuesday morning, our parent coalition had grown from 7 families to over 40. Amy sent me an email saying she was pushing for a full audit of every camera in the district. The central office was fighting her hard and threatening her job if she kept pushing. She asked if we could meet privately after school to discuss her options. We met at a coffee shop where she told me she was thinking about going to the media as a whistleblower. She had documents showing the district knew about the cameras for months and did nothing. I told her we'd support whatever she decided, but to be careful about retaliation. Wednesday was quiet, but I could feel everyone preparing for the board meeting on Thursday. My daughter spent hours after school working on her speech for the public comment period. She wrote it 5 times, trying to get every word perfect. I practiced mine in the mirror, trying not to cry when I talked about the damage to our girls. Sandra helped us time everything since we only got 3 minutes each to speak. Thursday evening, we all gathered at my house to do final practice runs. My daughter stood in front of all the parents and delivered her speech without looking at notes once. Everyone clapped when she finished, and I saw several moms wiping their eyes. We drove to the district office together in a convoy of cars. The meeting room was packed, with standing room only and reporters everywhere. Mark had called me that morning to say he'd filed formal charges against Lynch and Gary. He listed multiple victims as Jane does to protect the girls' identities. He said more charges might come as they kept investigating, but this was enough to start. The district announced Friday afternoon that Lynch was on paid leave while they investigated. It wasn't enough since she was still getting paid, but at least she wasn't at the school anymore. The kids were talking about it all day, and my daughter said the mood was weird. Some kids were happy Lynch was gone, but others blamed the swim team girls for causing problems. Coach called a team meeting after school, even though there was no team yet. He told the girls his coaching money was frozen and he might have to quit if the season got canceled. The room got really quiet, and some girls started crying, feeling guilty. My daughter raised her hand and told everyone this wasn't their fault for speaking up. She said adults failed to protect them, and they had to protect themselves. Coach nodded and said she was right, but you could see he was struggling. After the meeting, one of the boys who'd been making gross jokes walked up to my daughter. I tensed up, ready to intervene, but he surprised both of us. He said his older sister made him understand how scary this must be for the girls. He apologized for the jokes and said he was sorry for making things worse. My daughter accepted his apology, but kept her distance, which I thought was smart. She told me later she appreciated it, but didn't fully trust him yet. That evening, the vendor's lawyers called Sandra, saying they wanted to make a deal. They'd give us all their emails and installation records if we agreed to protect them from lawsuits. They were just following district orders, they said, and would throw the district under the bus to get their protection. Sandra said their lawyers were scared and wanted out before criminal charges expanded. We agreed to the deal, since we needed those records more than we needed to sue the vendor. Saturday morning, Sandra got boxes of documents delivered to her office from the vendor. She called me immediately, saying the emails were even worse than we thought. There were messages from October talking about getting cameras in before anyone noticed. The district administrators were pushing hard for installation over winter break, when nobody would be around. They knew exactly what they were doing and tried to hide it from parents. We spent the weekend organizing everything for the next board meeting and preparing for a long fight. My daughter was doing better, but still checking every room for cameras wherever we went. The other girls were struggling too, with many still refusing to use school bathrooms. Parents kept their kids home on Monday, saying they wouldn't come back until changes were made. The district was losing money every day from absent students and feeling the pressure. Tuesday night's board meeting was packed with over 300 people crammed into the auditorium. I'd practiced my speech 20 times, but my hands still shook walking to the microphone. I talked about trust being broken and our daughters feeling unsafe in their own school. My daughter stood up next and her voice was steady, talking about how hard it was to speak up against adults. She said, "Real leaders protect people who can't protect themselves." The board members actually seemed to be listening, though one guy kept checking his phone every few minutes. More parents spoke, and then Sandra presented our legal arguments about privacy violations and liability issues. After 2 hours of public comments, the board went into their private session while we all waited in the hallway. When they came back out, the board president announced they were voting on immediate changes to district policy. They voted 7-0 to ban all cameras in changing areas, effective immediately. They also voted to hire an outside company to check every camera in every school. They promised new rules would be written with parents helping to make them. People started clapping and crying, but I knew this was just the first step. Wednesday morning, Mark called to update us on the criminal case against Gary. He said they had enough evidence to move forward with multiple charges, including unlawful surveillance. The investigation into Lynch and other administrators would take months, but he felt good about the evidence. He warned us that Gary's lawyers would probably try to make a deal to avoid trial. Thursday afternoon, Amy sent her preliminary Title IX report to all the parents who filed complaints. She confirmed the district created a hostile environment that violated federal law. Her report required the district to provide counseling for all affected students at no cost. They also had to keep the alternate changing arrangements until trust was rebuilt. The district had 60 days to follow all her requirements or face federal investigation. She said this was one of the clearest violations she'd seen in 15 years. Friday, the community pool board called, saying they'd agreed to host tryouts next week. Parent volunteers would supervise, and absolutely no recording devices would be allowed on the property. Coach Wyatt would run them even though his job with the district was still uncertain. He'd been fighting for the girls behind the scenes and wanted them to have their chance. Saturday morning, my daughter put on her swimsuit for the first time in weeks. She was quiet in the car and I didn't push her to talk. At the pool, she walked to the edge and stared at the water for a long time. She dove in and swam a few laps while I watched from the bleachers. After 20 minutes, she climbed out and walked over to me with tears in her eyes. She said she wasn't ready to compete this year and needed to focus on getting better first. I hugged her and told her I was proud of her for trying, and even prouder she was choosing what was best for her. Sunday, Georgia's investigation article came out in the paper and online. She'd found evidence of surveillance problems at 3 other district schools going back 5 years. Our phones started ringing with reporters wanting interviews, but we decided to focus on the legal stuff instead. Sandra said the district's lawyers had reached out about settling our complaints. They wanted to talk about policy changes more than money, which was what we wanted too. 6 weeks passed, and things slowly got better, bit by bit. The cameras were gone from every changing room in the whole district after the audit found 12 more illegal installations. Lynch was still on leave, waiting to see if she'd be charged with anything criminal. Gary's trial was set for spring, and his lawyer was already trying to delay it. Coach Wyatt was coaching a smaller team with 2 new assistant coaches the district hired. Only 8 girls tried out, but they were determined to rebuild the program the right way. My daughter was eating normal meals again and sleeping through the night without nightmares. She even started laughing with her friends at lunch, though she still checked for cameras everywhere we went. The school installed frosted glass on all the bathroom stall doors after parents demanded more privacy. 3 board members who voted against the changes originally didn't run for re-election. The district hired a new safety director, who actually had experience with student privacy laws. Parents formed a permanent oversight committee to review all security decisions going forward. My daughter joined the committee as the student representative, even though it meant facing her fears every meeting. She told me the fight we started protected kids who couldn't protect themselves, and that made everything worth it. We were both stronger now, and the changes we forced would last long after we were gone.